Well, it's Tuesday, and we're revisiting a subject that's been a subject that we have visited in the past, scale and gauge. And today we're just going to be talking about gauge.
Oh.
Because people keep saying they're confused about the issue still.
Right.
What is gauge? Gauge is just the distance between the two rails.
Oh, okay.
That's all.
That's pretty easy.
And it doesn't have anything to do with scale. The gauge might be 30 feet. Some big marine railroad, it might be 9 millimeters.
Oh, teeny thing.
Yeah, a little model railroad.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so that's just the gauge.
Oh, okay.
That's all it is. Well, in order to truly appreciate gauge, there's a concept we sort of have to understand, and that's standard gauge. When they were first building railroads, and they've been building railroads for thousands of years, but when they were first building them, there was no standardization because why?
Right.
Every railway, every railroad was just unique to itself. You were just trying to move some rocks from one place to another. There was no interchange between equipment. There was no anything. So there was no standardization of any kind of gauges. They were using typically wood rails, and they just lay the wood rails across some cross ties, put wheels on top of that, and roll the whole thing down. It worked way better than trying to roll a cart through the dirt.
I can't imagine.
Roll it down rails instead.
Keep it out of the mud.
And you just had to make sure that your rails were the same width as the wheels on your carts. And then you also had to have some system to keep the wheels from falling off the rails.
Right.
And most typically that was done with a guardrail. On the rails themselves, they just have a secondary rail to the inside or outside of that would catch the wheel. What did I say something funny?
Oh, I was just thinking back in the good old days in the farm country when we'd move the old outhouse.
That fell off the rails quickly.
They were usually so wide you had to put down some boards when you move it to the new hole.
Same idea. Same idea, moving the outhouse.
Two-holer, one-holer, okay.
My gosh, do we digress. Anyway, that's... If you're trying to move your outhouse from point A to point B, it's so much easier if you can roll it down some rails, some boards, something, because otherwise you're just trying to roll wheels through dirt.
Yeah.
So railroads have been around as long as there have been wheels.
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah.
But there was no standardization to anything. You'd put your boards down, you'd put your outhouse on your cart, and you'd roll the thing down the rails. If you needed to keep the thing from falling off the boards, you could just put another board to the inside of the board that was already there, and then when your wheels went over there, they'd hit that board, and it would keep the whole thing from falling off.
Yes.
That was a railroad for the first
track was born.
2,000 or 3,000 years of railroads. I want to talk a little bit about history, because we both taught school.
Yes.
So then we have to bring in history. It would seem that should be a simple thing to say, what is the gauge of a thing? But there are these references like, well, this is standard gauge. Standard gauge. Well, what is standard gauge? Well, standard gauge would be normally referred to as 4 feet, 8 1/2 inches between the rails. Okay, well, that seems easy to understand, but how in the heck did it end up being 4 feet, 8 1/2 inches? And so
somebody had my algebra teacher.
I brought out this little model just to demonstrate. This is 1/32 scale. We're not talking about scale, but it's a 1/32 scale representation of what is widely credited to be the world's first steam locomotive.
Oh.
Trevithick's Penny Darren.
Oh, I just think it's cute. I'm not sure he'd use it for, but
really
it's cute.
Neat. Well, he had actually built one locomotive before this. So in fairness, this was his second locomotive. His first one was just kind of a proof of concept that he called Catch Me If You Can. And it was a little amusement park train. And he'd just take people around for rides and catch me if you can. This one he called Penny Darren. He was this young man. He was a teenager building steam locomotives in the early part of the 1800s, the 19th century. And he was building, and this was one of the static steam engines that he built for the Penny Darren Steel Works.
Oh.
And they wanted a bigger engine to run some steel stamp mill thing. And so he pulled this engine out, built them a bigger engine to run their stamp. And then he thought, I'm going to see if I can mount that one on a cart and make it go down the tracks.
Oh, there you go.
The tracks. Because they already had a railroad that was a couple of miles long.
There you go.
For hauling steel. Just with, like a horse pulling the cart or something. There were no steam locomotives, but that's all they did. And so he built this steam contrivance that would roll down the rails that were already there and haul the steel carts.
Wow.
And it worked.
Wow.
And it worked. Now, notice the rails here, if you can see, they're just flat pieces of metal. And the wheel just rides on it, and then they have the guardrail to the inside of that to keep the wheels from falling off the rails.
Well, that's neat.
Moreover, the rails are only about that long.
Oh.
Or so. They didn't know how to roll rail and make long lengths of rail, so they would just cast these plates.
Oh.
And the plates interlocked with each other, and those set on top of the cross ties. So the wheels are just riding on a flat surface with a little guardrail to keep the whole thing from falling off.
Hence the scallops.
Hence the scallops, and the scallops are pointing up to catch the wheel. Moreover, the scallops are adding strength, and then there's a seam at every single cross tie because there was no way to roll rail.
Huh.
Anyway, that's how this guy worked, and it worked really well. They were using this thing to haul loads of steel along the river. The first steam locomotive.
Well, that's really cool.
Isn't that cool?
That's really cool.
Well, very rapidly, somebody thought, this is an idea whose idea will come. And somewhere around 1825, they had really started to perfect these things. And one of the things they had done is they put the flanges on the wheels instead of on the rails. That was an improvement.
Right.
But that led to a problem. The gauge here is measured from the center of the plate to the center of the plate. So most of these things were built at about 5 feet because just given human scale and everything, it is 5 feet. Take a tape measure and go out and measure the distance between the tires on your car. They're going to be about 5 feet.
Really?
Somewhere on the tread, 5 feet will be in the middle of your tread there somewhere. It's just a matter of physics, human scale, and economics that 5 feet is an appropriate size to make things.
Sounds about right.
So this is built to a 5-foot gauge, measured from the center of the plate to the center of the plate. Okay? So when they started saying, well, we're going to put the flange on the wheel instead of on the rail, measuring it from the middle of the plate to the middle of the plate isn't a very good option anymore.
No.
Because if you make the rail bigger, you've changed the flange weight. So it was like, we better start measuring the gauge from the inside of the rail to the inside of the rail.
Okay, that makes sense.
And if you measure that on a 5-foot gauge track, it's 4 feet 8 inches. Because the rails are 4 inches wide.
There you go.
So
it's
4
simple
feet
math.
8. So how come 4 feet 8.5 got standardized?
This is one of those trick questions.
This is one of those trick questions, and it's funny, and it's clever, and it's cute. So one of the railroads, all the railroads started building to 4 feet 8 inches, and one of the railroads said, our turns are very sharp, and when our carts go through there, they bind up.
Oh, yeah.
So during the turns, we're just widening the gauge to 4 feet 8.5 inches. And then they said, the wheels are wide enough and the rails are wide enough. Why don't we just widen the whole thing to 4 feet 8.5
Good
inches?
idea.
And all the other railroads were going, well, our carts are binding up too. And everybody knocked their rails out 1/2 inch. And pretty soon everybody was building railroads to 4 feet 8.5 inches.
Oh, there you go.
And the king thought it was a grand idea, and the queen thought it was a grand idea, and then Abraham Lincoln came along and he thought it was a grand idea and signed the Railroad Act and said, the official gauge of the United States is 4 feet 8.5 inches. And the global standard gauge for
There it is.
standard-sized railroads became 4 feet 8.5 inches.
Remember that.
Remember that. There's a quiz
end.
at the end of this whole thing. That doesn't mean that people still didn't build railroads at 3 feet, 2 feet, 9 millimeters, whatever.
Right.
But the standard scale, the standard gauge, not scale, let's not get those confused
No,
because
don't
we're
do
here to
that.
not confuse those things.
All right.
The standard gauge became 4 feet 8.5 inches. And when we refer to standard gauge,
That's the standard.
that's what we're referring to, 4 feet 8.5 inches. Could be something else, but if we're saying standard.
Standard. There it is.
So that's gauge. The distance between the rails has nothing to do with scale, but when we say standard,
There it
because
is.
of this interesting bit of history, it's 4 feet 8.5 inches.
Right.
Okay?
There it is.
Got it?
Got it.
You ready for the quiz?
Okay, boys and girls.
Okay, there actually is no quiz, but there is an opportunity to subscribe to the channel
Yes.
or to become a member of the channel. And
Yes.
you can subscribe, which doesn't cost a darn thing,
Nope.
by clicking on the blue button. Are
Right.
we ready for it? Zoink, the blue button.
You'll get an A.
Well, we're not sure how you found this hopefully not boring video on the internet, but we hope you didn't find it boring.
Educational.
Educational at the very least. And we will see you here on Sunday
Right.
with some Sunday foolishness.
We'll see you. Bye.
Bye-bye.